Good morning, everyone. I pray that y'all are keeping warm in these cold winter days and snuggling up and have a fire going. I think I live under a blanket most of the day. Even when I'm working, I've got one on my lap. So I pray that in these days ahead, the warm winds of spring will come and we'll see the earth reborn again. And as a reminder of the transforming power of God in our lives. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Precious Lord, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you for the very many blessings in our lives. We thank you for being the blessed controller of all things and for the reminder that every day is a gift from you. We pray that in these days and weeks ahead, that you will heal people that are sick, that are struggling, not only with COVID, but with so many other things, that you will bless families as they have been together. Instead of tension driving them apart, I pray that love would abound in each and every household, Lord. I pray for wisdom for our leaders, for our national and state and local leaders, as they try to do the best in a situation that is almost untenable. But Lord, you are in charge. You alone are letting this virus last as long as it needs to for your kingdom purposes. And I just lift ourselves before your throne of grace, praying that you will use us mightily in these days as an encouragement and as a bold witness to others. In Jesus' precious and holy name I pray with thanksgiving. Amen. I want to make sure my volume's turned up, so that's good. The lesson we have today is from Esther 3, and we continue in this story. And Haman is the one that has entered the scene, and he is the hater of the Jews. Esther 3. 4 years had passed since God had moved his mighty way, making Esther King Xerxes' queen. All in his perfect timing and his perfect will, he would use this obedient young woman to save her people. And as we study further, we will see that the honeymoon is over and Satan remains poking and prodding God's enemies to come against his children. During this time, Esther has learned who is trustworthy and who is working against her. She has the God-given gift of grace and great statesmanship and diplomacy that will serve her well. She will bring a smile to the face of her God, as well as her cousin Mordecai. In verse 1, we are introduced to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. In these first two verses, there's a great insight into the actions of Mordecai. Haman, it appeared, being an Agagite, was most notably a descendant from King Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and we learned about him in 1 Samuel 15:20. They were sworn enemies of God and his people, and King Xerxes had elevated him to the position of prime minister in his kingdom. Jews had lived by this time free to worship their God and work within the kingdom of their captivity, Persia. The ongoing problem for the Hebrew children would be the constant nemesis of the Amalekites, who always sought to destroy them through the ages. In Exodus 17:8-16, the Amalekites attacked the Israelites as they had left Egypt for the Promised Land. And in Exodus 17:16, we learn that for this reason the Lord would, quote, be at war against the Amalekites from generation to generation. In Deuteronomy 25:19, Israel was not to forget, quote, to blot out the name of Amalek from under the heaven. King Saul's attack on the Amalekites in 1 Samuel 15 resulted in the death of most of the Amalekites and also eventually King Agag. But not all of the Amalekites were killed as God had commanded. So the Israelites continued to battle them through their history. And King Saul's failure to totally destroy them removed God's hand and Saul's crown from his life. It is interesting that King Saul's father was Kish of the tribe of Benjamin, and that is also the lineage of Mordecai's family in 1 Samuel 1:9 and Esther 2:5-6. On the stage of human history stood two mortal enemies, God and Satan, Mordecai and Haman, sin and salvation, and the battle for the very existence of the Jewish people was about to begin. So let's open our Bibles to Esther 3, beginning in verses 1 and 2. Haman is elevated. Verse 1. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. The intriguing thing about this is that Mordecai had been essential in saving the life of King Xerxes by informing Queen Esther of the plot of his guards to take his life. But Haman was the person that Xerxes showered his favor upon. Mordecai was an official of the city of Susa and could and would sit at the king's gateway with the other officials. He was obedient to the laws of King Xerxes, but bowing prostrate on his face before Haman, he could and would not do. Haman desired to be worshipped as a god and desired personal glory. Mordecai would not bow down to anyone except Jehovah God. To bow before Haman would be practicing idolatry, and Mordecai had determined in his heart he would be no part of that. Isaiah 42:8, quote, I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another or my praise to idols. Has there ever been a time in your life when you knew you were doing the right thing, honoring God, possibly at great risk, and man's favor rested on another? How did God encourage your heart at that moment? And as a Christian, whom do you really seek to please each day and why? People or God? And how often do you give God all the credit for what you're able to accomplish each day of your life? When are you more in danger of finding yourself more self-centered than God-centered? And how can we remedy that? Challenging questions, then and now. Mordecai made a choice here before God and man. His wise counsel and his position of godly influence were at stake, but he would not bow down and honor the wicked Haman. Mordecai did honor King Xerxes with his obedience and wise counsel, but not this man who was bent on his and God's people's destruction. This was a reflection of the centuries-old conflict between the tribe of Benjamin and the Amalekites, and they were Israel's sworn enemy. Verses 3 through 6. Haman's hatred grows. When the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. Mordecai, for her own protection, had trained up and made Esther promise she would never reveal that she was Jewish. But the officials, not understanding Mordecai's refusal to bow down, finally pushed him so hard that he revealed his nationality and identity as a child of God. The frustrated officials recounted Mordecai's refusal and the fact that Mordecai was a Jew to Haman. Mordecai had forbidden Hadassah, her Persian name was Esther, to reveal she was a Jewish when she entered the king's harem. But now the royal officials knew exactly who he was, and Mordecai had exposed himself as well as his people. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Verse 6, yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. This knowledge drove Haman deeper into his vanity and his cruelty. How dare Mordecai refuse? He was to be worshipped and honored as second in command in the kingdom, and he would not only make an example of Mordecai, but of all the Jewish people in the kingdom. He would finally be able to annihilate each and every one of them off the face of the earth. Verse 7, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month of Nisan, that was April or May of 474 BC, the 5th year of Queen Esther's reign, that the pure, and that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and a month, and the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. This verse is where the Feast of Purim comes from, to commemorate the Jewish people's deliverance from the certain death at the hands of the madman Haman. The Pur is the lot that was cast by the Persian court magicians for the Jews' destruction. But God had other plans, and he's never too early nor too late. There was an 11-month delay between the casting of the lot and the implementation of Haman's horrific plan. Verse 8, when Haman said to King Xerxes, there's a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all the other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. 10,000 talents of silver equals 33 tons of silver, which equals 1,182,720 ounces at $32 an ounce is almost $38 billion in US dollars today. It was a massive amount of money, and Haman's hatred had no limits, and to him it was worth every last penny. The Jews were obedient citizens, and there was never any cause for trouble or threat to the king. With great cunning, Haman never mentioned their name. The king Xerxes also did not bother to investigate and find out who Haman was so concerned about. A rebellion did not seem to worry him. It seems at such critical times of his reign, King Xerxes consistently would always look to the circle of his inner advisors who surrounded him and could concede decisions to them. Even with Haman being demonically determined to try to entice King Xerxes with a bribe to increase the chances that the king would favor his request, we know God was at work to preserve his people, and he should not have wasted his breath nor his fortune. Verse 10, so the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and the enemy of the Jews. Verse 11, keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. Xerxes could have bought and paid Haman 1,000 times over. He neither wanted nor needed this man's money. To ensure no one would question Haman, King Xerxes in reality became his pawn and gave Haman his official signet ring as his approval of the authority Haman had to seal the documents for Haman's wicked actions. Haman would hire his mercenaries to do his dirty work. Verse 12, then on the 13th day of the first month, 11 months after the lot was cast, now it's March 7th of 474 BC. This was the day before Passover was to be celebrated by the Jews. The royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out the script of each province and in the language of each people all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. They were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. The day of destruction was set, and the announcement of it went out to all the people, all the provinces, and all the languages spoken in the kingdom. There was no doubt this was the order of the king, and there was not a person, Persian, Jew, or other peoples, that did not know what this was about to happen, that this was about to happen. Every people group in the kingdom had to be terrified. The Jews were targeted, but who would be next and why? Verse 13. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. 11 months from Haman's decree to this expected fulfillment of it was February-March of 473 BC, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality so they would be ready for that day. There was a plot to virtually destroy every Jewish person, men, women, children, all their possessions, a complete eradication of God's people. And it's chillingly a reminder that thousands of years later, another madman would conspire to do the same thing, Adolf Hitler and his crazed Nazi war machine. The Lutheran pastor who lived during World War II, Pastor Martin Niemöller, wrote these chilling words after the war. He had been a Nazi sympathizer originally, but then had his phone tapped by the Gestapo and then realized how evil the Third Reich and Adolf Hitler was. He stated, first they came for the socialists, I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. The quote is permanently displayed on the entrance wall of the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., lest we ever forget those horrible, horrific days and our responsibility for our neighbors. Friday, January 22nd, 2021 was National Sanctity of Human Life Day. I believe the modern day application of Niemöller's Code is for the protection of unborn life. Innocent babies cannot cry out from the womb, but we have a voice. Because if we do not take up and protect their right to live as unborn babies, who will take up ours as we age and become infirm? Verse 15, the couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. How the king could think this was a good thing is absolutely bewildering. He would lose his tax base of an entire population segment of his kingdom. He would lose faithful kingdom workers, and he would lose a faithful and trusted advisor, Mordecai, in the process. And unbeknownst to him at this very moment, he would lose his beloved queen, Esther. But he and Haman sat down and proceeded to imbibe and push the consequences out of his mind. Esther's humility and obedience would eventually bring a great deliverance for her people, and at the end, and an end to Haman and his wicked schemes. But there were other things that had to be accomplished in the process. The people of the great city of Susa were bewildered, as must have been the entire population of King Xerxes' kingdom. They had no idea why he was coming after the Jews now and what would stop him from annihilating any of the other people groups. There was a panic and terror within the population, but no one spoke out against Haman, not one. He was wicked, cunning, extremely rich and powerful, and a huge threat to every human being in the kingdom. Haman was Satan's pawn to alter the plan of redemptive history, God's plans for Israel and the coming of their Messiah. But God was and still is in control and working out the details of history, his story, one day at a time. He would do a mighty work in the life of Esther and in the deliverance of his people, and would be accomplished for their good and his glory. I'd like to close with the words to this wonderful hymn today by the Scottish pastor, Dr. Walter Chalmers Smith. Immortal, invisible, God only wise. Immortal, invisible, God only wise. In light inaccessible, hid from our eyes. Most blessed, most glorious, the Ancient of Days, almighty, victorious, thy great name we praise. Unresting, unhastening, the silent as light. Nor wanting, nor wasting, thou rulest in might. Thy justice like mountains, high soaring above. Thy clouds, which are fountains of goodness and love. To all life thou givest, to both great and small. In all life thou livest, the true life of all. We blossom and flourish as leaves on a tree, and wither and perish, but naught changes thee. Great God of all glory, great God of all light, thine angels adore thee, all veiling their sight. All praise we would render, oh help us to see. 'Tis only thy splendor of light hideth thee. I pray these lessons are blessing your soul and looking even to the current application when governments, kings, governors, presidents, whoever leads us, are not trustworthy at times. But we have a faithful God who is the blessed controller of all things, and never forget that. I love you all dearly. I miss you terribly. I pray that it will not be too much longer before we can physically be together again. My love and prayers are always with each of you. Bye-bye.